They say desperation has no pride. They're wrong. Pride is often all that remains when everything else has been taken. London, 1817. The coldest winter in a decade. Eloise Wetherington had been walking for 3 days. Not toward anything, there was nowhere left to go, but away from the last boarding house that had turned her out for inability to pay. Her shoes, once fine kid leather, were split at the seams. Her cloak, inadequate even when new, now hung in tatters that did nothing against the wind cutting through Mayfair's empty streets. She had not eaten in 2 days. Had not slept in longer. 6 months ago, she had been Miss Eloise Wetherington of Hartfield Manor. Daughter. Accomplished. Expected to make a good match. Then came the scandal, the falsified documents, her father's convenient death, her mother's swift decline. The relatives who turned away. The inheritance that vanished. The positions denied because no one would vouch for a woman whose family name meant disgrace. So she had walked. And now, as snow began to fall, Eloise understood she was going to die. Her legs finally betrayed her. She collapsed at the foot of a massive iron gate, barely seeing the dark mansion beyond. The snow felt almost warm, dangerous, some distant part of her mind warned. The gate creaked open. Footsteps. A voice, low and rough. "Can you stand?" "No," she whispered. Strong hands lifted her. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her. "Foolish girl. Of all the doors in London, you chose mine." Hey guys, I need your help in getting this channel to 500 subscribers. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more exciting updates. Now let's continue the story. Chapter 1. The Bargain of Survival. Eloise woke to warmth, which was so unfamiliar she initially mistook it for death. Her eyes opened to an unfamiliar ceiling, plasterwork decorated with elaborate cornicing that spoke of wealth so old it no longer needed to announce itself. The bed beneath her was soft in a way she had almost forgotten beds could be. Clean linen. Heavy blankets. The scent of lavender and something medicinal. She tried to sit up. Her body protested with a wave of dizziness that forced her back against the pillows. "I wouldn't recommend sudden movement." The voice came from the shadows near the window. Male. Low. Carefully controlled. Eloise turned her head slowly. A man stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the grey winter light filtering through heavy curtains. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Perfectly still in a way that suggested either military training or deliberate self-discipline. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as barely more than a rasp. "Elmsbury House." He did not turn. "You collapsed at my gate 3 days ago." 3 days. The information settled over her with cold weight. 3 days of vulnerability, of being tended by strangers, of being utterly at the mercy of a man whose name she recognized even through the fog of fever and exhaustion. The Duke of Elmsbury. The cursed Duke. The scarred recluse whom society whispered about in tones mixing fear and fascination. "I should leave," Eloise said, though she knew she lacked the strength to stand, let alone walk. To go where, precisely? The question was not unkind, merely factual. Eloise had no answer. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sounds of a household in motion, servants in corridors, doors opening and closing, the muffled efficiency of a well-run estate. "You are Miss Eloise Wetherington," the Duke said. Still he had not turned. "Daughter of the late Edward Wetherington of Hartfield Manor. Your father died 6 months ago under circumstances society found convenient to question. Your mother followed within weeks. Your inheritance was contested, then dissolved. Your relatives declined association. You have been surviving on the charity of distant connections who have, one by one, withdrawn their support." Each sentence landed like a stone. Not cruel, but undeniable. He had investigated her. Of course he had. A strange woman collapsing at one's gate warranted inquiry, particularly for a man whose own reputation was built on suspicion and rumor. "Your research is thorough," Eloise managed. Necessity, not curiosity. Finally, he turned. Eloise had been prepared for scars. Society's whispers had painted elaborate pictures, disfigurement so severe it explained his isolation, his rejection of company, his legendary coldness. What she saw instead was a man perhaps 35 years of age, with dark hair silvering at the temples and features that might have been called handsome had they not been set in such rigid control. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, puckered and old, but not monstrous. not the horror society had led her to expect. What struck her more than the scar was his eyes. Grey. Assessing. Completely devoid of sympathy. Your reputation precedes you, Your Grace, Eloise said carefully. As does yours, Miss Wetherington. Which brings us to the matter at hand. He moved to stand at the foot of the bed, hands clasped behind his back. You have nowhere to go. No resources. No prospects. Society has erased you as thoroughly as it has erased me, though for different reasons. We are both, in our own ways, ghosts. I did not ask for rescue. No. You asked for nothing. You merely had the misfortune, or perhaps the instinct, to collapse at my gate rather than someone else's. His tone remained flat, almost bored. Nevertheless, you are here. And your presence creates both a problem and an opportunity. Eloise waited. She had learned, in the months since her world had collapsed, that survival sometimes meant listening rather than speaking. The Duke moved to the window, looking out over grounds Eloise could not see from her position. My uncle, the previous Duke, died 2 years ago. His will contained conditions. I inherited the title, the estate, the properties. But control remains conditional upon marriage. I must marry and maintain the appearance of stability for 1 year, or oversight of the estate passes to a board of executors chosen by my uncle's associates. I am sorry for your predicament, Your Grace, but I fail to see. I am offering you a position, Miss Wetherington. Not as a companion or servant, but as my wife. The words hung in the air between them, absurd and impossible, and yet spoken with such matter-of-fact clarity that Eloise could not immediately dismiss them. That is insane. That is practical. He turned back to face her. You need protection, resources, and time to recover your position in a world that has rejected you. I need to satisfy the terms of my uncle's will. A marriage of convenience serves both purposes. Marriages of convenience are arrangements between families, Your Grace. Contracts negotiated between equals. I have no family, no position, nothing to bring to such an arrangement. Precisely. Which makes you ideal. He moved closer, though he maintained a careful distance from the bed. A woman with connections would bring expectations, social obligations, interference from relatives. You bring none of that. You are, forgive the bluntness, desperate enough to accept terms that no woman with alternatives would consider. It should have been insulting. Instead, it was simply true. What terms? Eloise asked. 1 year. We marry quietly. You live here, maintain the appearance of a functioning household, and make no demands upon my time or attention beyond what is necessary for public credibility. We occupy separate quarters. We do not involve ourselves in each other's lives. At the end of 1 year, once the will's conditions are satisfied, the marriage will be quietly dissolved. You will leave with sufficient funds to establish yourself independently, enough to secure lodging, perhaps a small income, and the ability to rebuild your life away from London. A business arrangement. Exactly so. Eloise stared at him, trying to identify any hint of emotion beneath the careful control. She found none. This was a man who had learned to excise feeling from decision-making, who approached even marriage as one might approach the hiring of a new steward. And if I refuse, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Then you are free to leave as soon as you are strong enough to walk. I will provide enough money for a coaching inn and a week's lodging. After that, you will be precisely where you were before you arrived here. Dying in the snow. Starving in cheap rooms. Begging for positions that would never materialize because no one would vouch for a Wetherington. Why me? Eloise asked. Surely there are other women, equally desperate, who would. Because you are already ruined, the Duke said bluntly. Your reputation cannot be damaged further. A marriage to me, brief though it will be, can only improve your standing by association. And because... He paused, and for the first time, something flickered across his expression. Not sympathy. Something colder. Because you know what it is to be erased by forces beyond your control. You understand discretion born of necessity rather than choice. And you will not make the mistake of expecting affection where none can be given. The last sentence carried weight beyond its words. This was a man who had been hurt, Eloise realized. Not by scars or scandal, but by something deeper. Something that had taught him to view connection itself as dangerous. I would need time to consider, Eloise said. You have until tomorrow morning. The vicar can be brought discreetly if you accept. The ceremony will be brief and witnessed by minimal staff. Bans will be obtained retroactively through arrangements I have already put in place. No one outside this household need know the marriage occurred until it is already fact. You were very certain of my acceptance. I was certain of your circumstances. The decision itself remains yours. He moved toward the door, then paused. You should know that this house is not comfortable. The staff are loyal but few. I do not entertain. I do not maintain the social obligations expected of my position. You will be isolated here as surely as you were isolated in London, though with better accommodations and regular meals. And at the end of the year, freedom, money, and a marriage that ended quietly enough that it need not define the rest of your life. He opened the door. Mrs. Hartwell, the housekeeper, will bring you dinner. If you require anything, ring. Tomorrow morning, I will return for your answer. He was gone before Eloise could respond, the door closing with a soft click that sounded, to her exhausted mind, like the closing of one life and the potential opening of another. She lay back against the pillows, staring once more at the elaborate ceiling. Every instinct screamed that this was madness. That accepting such an arrangement would be trading one form of erasure for another. That becoming the temporary wife of a man society feared would only confirm her own status as damaged beyond repair. And yet, she was so tired. Tired of fear. Tired of hunger. Tired of watching herself disappear piece by piece until nothing remained but the act of survival itself. At least here, in this cold bargain with this cold man, the terms were clear. No false promises. No pretense of affection. Just shelter and safety and the slim possibility that she might, after 1 year of confinement, emerge with enough resources to build something resembling a life. Eloise closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would give her answer. Tonight, for the first time in months, she would sleep in a warm bed with a full stomach and allow herself to imagine that survival might be enough. The next morning arrived grey and cold. Eloise woke to find a simple dress laid out on the chair beside her bed, not new, but clean and well-made, appropriate for a woman of modest means. Mrs. Hartwell, a woman of perhaps 50 with kind eyes and a mouth that suggested she had learned not to ask unnecessary questions, helped Eloise dress and brought her downstairs to a small study where the Duke waited. He stood when she entered, a gesture of courtesy that seemed almost incongruous given the nature of their impending discussion. Miss Wetherington. Your Grace. Have you reached a decision? Eloise met his eyes. Grey and assessing. Waiting for logic rather than sentiment. I accept your terms, she said. 1 year. Separate lives. No expectations. She paused. And at the end, enough money to start again. Agreed. No relief crossed his features. No satisfaction. Just a slight nod, as if she had confirmed an expected business arrangement. The vicar will arrive this afternoon. Mrs. Hartwell will serve as witness. The ceremony will take place in the chapel. You should be aware that this will be legally binding, Miss Wetherington. The dissolution at year's end will require careful handling, but it will be managed. I understand. Do you? For the first time, something almost like concern flickered across his face. You are tying yourself to a man society considers cursed. To a household that operates in shadow. To a year of isolation that may be more difficult than the isolation you have already endured. With respect, Your Grace, nothing could be more difficult than freezing to death in the snow. A slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. Very well. Mrs. Hartwell will help you prepare. We will proceed this afternoon. The ceremony itself was brief to the point of brutal efficiency. The chapel was small, cold, and empty save for the four of them, Eloise, the Duke, Mrs. Hartwell, and a vicar who asked no questions and kept his eyes carefully averted from the Duke's scar. The vows were spoken in flat tones. The ring, a simple band that fit surprisingly well, slid onto Eloise's finger with a weight that seemed disproportionate to its size. I now pronounce you man and wife. The words echoed in the empty chapel. The Duke did not kiss her. He simply nodded once to the vicar, signed the register with swift strokes, and waited while Eloise added her own signature. Her hand shook slightly. The only sign of weakness she allowed herself. Thank you, Reverend, the Duke said. Mrs. Hartwell will see you out. And then they were alone. Husband and wife. Bound by law and necessity and absolutely nothing else. Your rooms are in the East Wing, the Duke said. Mrs. Hartwell will show you. We will take dinner separately. If you require anything, ring for staff. I work in the library most evenings. You are free to use the rest of the house as you see fit, though I would appreciate advance notice if you intend to enter the library or my study. Of course. Eloise looked down at the ring on her finger. What should I call you? Elmsbury. Your Grace. Either is acceptable. He paused. My given name is Julian, though I have not used it in some time. Julian, Eloise repeated softly. Something flickered in his eyes. Something almost like pain. Elmsbury will suffice. He left her standing in the chapel. Alone. Married. Safe in body while every instinct screamed that she had just traded one form of death for another. Mrs. Hartwell appeared in the doorway. Come along, Your Grace. Let me show you to your rooms. Your Grace. The title felt like a costume. Like playing dress-up in someone else's life. Eloise followed the housekeeper through cold corridors to a suite of rooms that were, despite the Duke's warnings, surprisingly comfortable. A bedroom with a proper fireplace. A small sitting room. Windows that looked out over snow-covered gardens. Furnishings that spoke of quality without ostentation. Will there be anything else, Your Grace? Mrs. Hartwell asked. No. Thank you. The door closed. Eloise sank into a chair by the window and stared out at the winter landscape. Married. Protected. Trapped. 1 year. She could survive 1 year. She had survived worse. The ring caught the light. A band of gold that meant everything and nothing. Eloise closed her eyes and let herself acknowledge, just for one moment, the profound loneliness of safety purchased at the cost of human connection. Then she opened them again. Tomorrow she would begin learning the rhythms of this strange household. Tomorrow she would start counting the days until freedom. Tonight, she would simply be grateful for warmth. Chapter 2, Proximity and Fracture. The first month passed in careful choreography. Eloise learned the rhythms of Elmsbury House the way one learns to navigate a foreign country, through observation, small mistakes, and gradual adaptation. Breakfast arrived on a tray in her sitting room at 8. The Duke took his meals in the dining room at 7, ensuring they never coincided. She had free access to the morning room, the music room, and the gardens, though the latter were too cold for more than brief walks. The library was forbidden territory unless explicitly invited. His study might as well have been locked. They saw each other perhaps twice a week, always by careful arrangement. A brief discussion of household matters in the morning room. A formal dinner when a visiting solicitor required the appearance of marital unity. Each interaction was measured, polite, and deliberately empty of anything resembling intimacy. Eloise found herself studying him during these encounters. The way he held himself with military precision. The deliberate control of his expressions. The slight flinch when servants entered rooms too quickly. He was a man perpetually braced for impact, she realized. Not cruel or cold by nature, but trained into distance by experience she could only guess at. He never touched her. Not even accidentally. He maintained a physical buffer of at least 3 feet at all times, as though proximity itself carried risk. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like living in a beautifully appointed tomb. Mrs. Hartwell proved to be the estate's beating heart. She managed the small staff with quiet efficiency, mediated the few external interactions the household required, and occasionally appeared in Eloise's sitting room with tea and neutral conversation that never quite crossed into familiarity but provided a lifeline nonetheless. His Grace keeps early hours, Mrs. Hartwell mentioned one morning, setting down the breakfast tray. Up before dawn most days. Works in the library until noon, then rides the estate boundaries regardless of weather. Does he see anyone? Eloise asked. Friends? Associates? His solicitor visits quarterly. The steward reports weekly. Beyond that. Mrs. Hartwell smoothed her apron. Elmsbury House has been quiet for some years now, Your Grace. How long have you served here? 20 years. I knew His Grace as a boy. Something softened in the housekeeper's expression. He was different then. Before his father's disgrace. Before society decided he was cursed rather than simply unfortunate. Eloise wanted to ask more, but Mrs. Hartwell's expression had already closed. Information about the Duke, it seemed, was dispensed sparingly and never without purpose. The second month brought unexpected change. The Duke fell ill, nothing serious, merely a winter fever that laid him low for several days. Mrs. Hartwell appeared in Eloise's sitting room looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but His Grace is—" She hesitated. "He refuses to allow the doctor to be called. Says it will pass. But the fever is high and he is not, that is, he becomes confused when ill. Speaks of things best left forgotten. You want me to tend him?" He would not ask. "But yes. If you would." Eloise found him in his chambers, which she had never before entered. The room was sparse to the point of asceticism. A bed. A wardrobe. A single chair by a cold fireplace. No personal effects. No books. No indication that anyone actually lived here rather than merely existed. The Duke lay in bed, fever-bright and restless. His shirt was soaked with sweat. When she approached, his eyes opened, unfocused, glazed. "You shouldn't be here," he mumbled. "Not safe. They'll use it against you." "No one is using anything," Eloise said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "You have a fever. You need water and rest." They used everything. Every letter. Every kindness. Turned it all to poison. His head turned on the pillow. "My father trusted them. Look what trust earned him." Eloise pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "Sleep, Your Grace. Whatever happened is in the past." "Julian," he said suddenly, his hand catching her wrist with surprising strength. "My name is Julian. Say it. Prove someone still remembers." "Julian," she said softly. "Rest now." His grip loosened. Within minutes, he had fallen into uneasy sleep. Eloise remained in the chair through the night, monitoring his fever, changing the cloths, ensuring he drank when he woke. By morning, the fever had broken. She slipped out before he fully woke, not wanting to embarrass him with her presence in his private space. When they next met, 3 days later, in the morning room to discuss a problem with the estate's southern boundary, he looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Mrs. Hartwell informed me you tended me during my illness. It seemed practical. You were fevered." "Nevertheless." "Thank you." The words came with visible difficulty. "That was not part of our arrangement." "Neither was kindness forbidden by it," Eloise replied. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a fractional softening. "You are not what I expected, Miss Wetherington." "Mrs. Elmsbury," she corrected gently. "At least while we maintain appearances." "Mrs. Elmsbury," he repeated, and this time there was the ghost of warmth in his tone. The change was subtle but undeniable. Conversations began to extend beyond strict necessity. He asked her opinion on household matters, then seemed genuinely interested in her responses. She noticed him leaving books in the morning room, not obviously for her, but positioned where she might find them. Small considerations. Tiny breaches in the wall between them. It was dangerous. They both knew it. Yet neither quite managed to stop. The shift accelerated when Eloise discovered the documents. She had not been searching. The library remained mostly off-limits, but the Duke had mentioned she might find a book of botanical illustrations there if she wished to identify the winter plants in the garden. She found the book easily enough, and then noticed a ledger that had slipped behind the shelf. She should have left it. Instead, she opened it. The entries dated back 20 years. Estate accounts, correspondence, legal documents. Most meant nothing to her. But then she saw it, a letter signed by her father, Edward Wetherington, addressed to the previous Duke of Elmsbury. The date was 2 months before her father's scandal broke. Asterisk, Your Grace, I must protest in the strongest terms the proposed actions of the investment consortium. The documentation you have shown me proves beyond doubt that the ventures are fraudulent. If we do not expose this scheme, we risk not only our own fortunes but the financial security of dozens of families. I stand with you in this matter, regardless of personal cost. Asterisk. Eloise's hands trembled as she turned pages. More letters. Her father and the previous Duke had been collaborating to expose financial fraud. And then, abruptly, the correspondence stopped. The next entries were legal notices. The Duke's family declared bankrupt under suspicious circumstances. Her father's reputation destroyed by falsified documents suggesting he had embezzled funds. Both families ruined within weeks of each other. Both men dead within months. The previous Duke of illness, her father of what society had called shame, but what Eloise suddenly suspected might have been something far more deliberate. You found them. Eloise spun. Julian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I wasn't searching, she said quickly. The ledger fell. I know. I left it there. He entered the library, closing the door behind him. I wanted you to find it, but I lacked the courage to simply show you. My father and your father were working together. Yes. To expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of society. Banking fraud. Political manipulation. Money stolen from investors and funneled into private accounts. Julian moved to the window. They gathered evidence. They were prepared to bring charges. And then, very suddenly, they became the ones accused. Who did this? The same men my uncle's will was designed to thwart. The executors who will take control of this estate if I fail to satisfy the marriage condition. He turned to face her. Men who believed my father's disgrace and death ended the threat. Who assumed the evidence died with him. But it didn't. No. My father hid copies. I found them after his death. I have spent the past 2 years trying to understand what I was looking at. Trying to decide if pursuing justice was worth the risk. His jaw tightened. And then you arrived at my gate. Eloise Wetherington, daughter of the only other man who stood against them. The implications crashed over her. Our marriage was expedient for multiple reasons, Julian finished. Yes, I needed a wife. But I also needed. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the admission. I needed someone who might understand. Someone with as much cause as I have to want the truth revealed. You used me. The words came out flat. Factual rather than accusatory. I offered you safety. That was genuine. But I will not claim pure motives. He met her eyes directly. I am sorry. You deserved honesty. Eloise stared at the ledger in her hands. Her father's handwriting. Proof that his ruin had been manufactured. That her family's destruction had been the price of his integrity. What happens now? She asked. Nothing, if you prefer. We continue as planned. 1 year. Then you leave with your payment and this becomes none of your concern. Julian's expression was carefully neutral. Or we. A sharp knock interrupted him. Mrs. Hartwell entered without waiting for permission, her face pale. Your Grace. Forgive the intrusion. But Lord Carrington has arrived. He is in the entrance hall and insists on seeing you immediately. Julian's entire body went rigid. Carrington. Of course. Did he state his business? He says he has come to pay his respects to your new Duchess. To welcome her to the family. Mrs. Hartwell's tone made clear her skepticism. He has brought his wife. How thoughtful, Julian said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. Show them to the drawing room. Inform them we will join them shortly. He waited until Mrs. Hartwell left before turning to Eloise. Lord Carrington is my uncle's executor. One of the men who will control this estate if our marriage fails to satisfy the will's terms. One of the conspirators. Almost certainly. Though I have no proof. Julian straightened his jacket with sharp, angry movements. He is here to assess you. To determine if our marriage is legitimate or merely a legal fiction he can challenge. What should I do? Precisely what you have been doing. Be the Duchess. Be my wife. He paused at the door. And for God's sake, do not let him see fear. He feeds on it. The drawing room had been prepared with the speed that suggested Mrs. Hartwell had anticipated the need for formal entertaining. Lord Carrington proved to be a man of perhaps 60, silver-haired and distinguished, with the particular smile of someone who enjoyed making others uncomfortable. His wife, Lady Carrington, possessed the sharp eyes of a woman trained to catalogue social failures. Elmsbury. Lord Carrington rose, arms spread in false bonhomie. And this must be your bride. My dear Duchess, what a pleasure. Though I confess, we were all quite surprised to learn of the marriage. So sudden. So private. We prefer discretion, Julian said, his tone absolutely flat. Of course, of course. Though one wonders at such haste. The Duke's requirements under the will are quite specific. A genuine marriage, not a legal convenience. Lord Carrington's smile sharpened. I trust all is well? The Duchess is comfortable here? Happy in her new position? The implication was clear. He was questioning the marriage's legitimacy, suggesting that Eloise was a fraud, an actress hired to fulfill legal requirements. I am quite comfortable, Lord Carrington, Eloise said, keeping her voice steady. Elmsbury House suits me well. How fortunate. And tell me, how did you and the Duke meet? Your family, I believe, experienced some difficulties? The Wetherington scandal was quite public. My family experienced deliberate destruction, Eloise replied, allowing steel to enter her tone. As I am certain you know. Lady Carrington's eyes widened slightly. Lord Carrington's smile froze. Strong words, Your Grace. Honest ones. Eloise, Julian said quietly. A warning. No. She stood, drawing herself to her full height. Lord Carrington has come here to assess whether I am a suitable Duchess. Whether our marriage is genuine. Allow me to clarify. I am Miss Eloise Wetherington, daughter of Edward Wetherington, who died after being falsely accused of crimes he did not commit. I married the Duke because I had nowhere else to go. That is honest enough for you, surely? The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Carrington recovered first. My dear Duchess, I meant no offence. And I am not your dear anything, Eloise continued. You came here to find weakness. To find a marriage of convenience you could challenge. You have found instead a legal union between two people who understand perfectly what was taken from their families. If that is inconvenient for you, Lord Carrington, I suggest you direct your concerns to your solicitor. Eloise. Julian's voice was sharper now. But when she looked at him, she saw something unexpected in his expression. Not anger. Something closer to admiration. Perhaps we should. The Duke and I have an understanding, Eloise said, turning back to Lord Carrington. One that is no business of yours beyond the legal requirements already satisfied. If you have concerns about the will's execution, address them through proper channels. Do not come into this house and insult either of us with implications. Lord Carrington stood abruptly. Lady Carrington, I believe we should take our leave. Clearly the Duchess is adjusting to her new position. He gave Julian a hard look. We will be watching Elmsbury. Very carefully. I would expect nothing less, Julian replied coldly. The Carringtons departed with frigid politeness. As soon as the door closed, Eloise felt her knees weaken. She had just publicly defended a man she barely knew against a threat she only partially understood. She had broken the fundamental rule of their arrangement, emotional distance, and done so in front of witnesses. I apologize, she said quietly. I should not have. No. Julian stepped closer, still maintaining that careful distance, but his expression was no longer controlled. No. You were. He seemed to struggle for words. You defended me. Defended us. When you had no obligation to do so. He was insulting you. Insulting me. I could not simply. Most would have. Most would have remained silent, allowed him to probe, avoided conflict. Julian's hand lifted slightly, as though he might reach for her, then dropped. You understand what you have done? Word of this will spread. Carrington will ensure it. You have made yourself a target. I was already a target. We both were. Eloise met his eyes. You told me I needed to be your wife. To maintain appearances. That is what I did. That was not appearances. That was. Julian stopped. For the first time since she had met him, genuine emotion cracked through his control. That was real. The words hung between them. Heavy with implication. Dangerous. The bargain was 1 year, Eloise said softly. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. Julian turned away, his shoulders tight. Carrington will investigate further. He will look for ways to challenge the marriage. And you have just proven that you are willing to stand with me publicly, which means. He stopped. Which means what? Which means you are no longer just a legal convenience. You are an ally. And allies can be hurt. He turned back to face her. I should send you away. For your own safety. You will not. How can you be certain? Because, Eloise said, I found my father's letters. I know what was taken from both our families. And I am not leaving until I understand why. She took a breath. 1 year was the bargain. But perhaps that year can serve more than one purpose. Julian stared at her for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he nodded. Then we proceed carefully, he said. Together. But Eloise, he used her given name deliberately. If this becomes dangerous, if they threaten you directly, the bargain ends immediately. Your safety is not negotiable. Agreed, Eloise lied, because she already knew that if it came to choosing between safety and truth, she would choose truth. Her father had. It had cost him everything. But some things, she was learning, were worth the cost. Julian seemed to sense the lie but let it pass. Instead, he moved to the door, then paused. What you did today, he said without turning. Thank you. He left before she could respond. Eloise sank into a chair, her hands trembling with delayed reaction. 1 month ago, she had been dying in the snow. Today, she had publicly declared herself the wife of a cursed duke and made an enemy of a man powerful enough to destroy families. The bargain, she realized, had become something far more complicated than survival. And she was no longer certain she wanted it to remain simple. Chapter 3, Choice and Exposure. The weeks following Lord Carrington's visit passed in a state of suspended tension. The household felt it. Servants moved more quietly, Mrs. Hartwell's efficient calm took on a protective edge, and Julian became even more withdrawn, spending long hours in the library poring over documents that Eloise was no longer excluded from examining. They had become, without quite acknowledging it, collaborators. Most evenings now found them in the library together, papers spread across the massive desk, constructing a timeline of destruction. Her father's letters. Financial records. Newspaper clippings about the scandals that had destroyed both families. Each piece of evidence revealed a pattern too precise to be coincidental. Here, Eloise said one evening, pointing to a bank transfer dated 3 weeks before her father's ruin. This withdrawal from my father's account, the one they claimed was embezzlement, it matches exactly the amount that appeared in Lord Carrington's private holdings. Julian leaned closer to examine the document, his shoulder nearly touching hers. The proximity had become familiar over these shared investigations, though neither acknowledged the gradual erosion of the careful distance they had once maintained. And here, Julian added, pulling another ledger forward. A corresponding transfer from my father's estate accounts. The same week. The same amount to Carrington's business partner, Lord Ashford. They stole from both families, then used the theft itself as evidence of our father's guilt. Eloise's hands clenched. The audacity is breathtaking. More than audacity. Precision. Julian straightened, moving to the window. They did not merely ruin our families. They orchestrated parallel destructions designed to discredit the only 2 men who knew about the consortium's fraud. My father's evidence appeared to be the ravings of a bankrupt man. Yours appeared to be the desperate lies of an embezzler. He turned back. Separately, each scandal was believable. Together, they reveal the pattern. Eloise stood, joining him at the window. Below, the estate grounds stretched into darkness. But proof of pattern is not proof of conspiracy. Not in a court of law. No. We would need documents directly linking Carrington and his associates to the falsified evidence. Witnesses willing to testify. Something irrefutable. Julian's reflection in the dark glass showed frustration. Which they would have destroyed years ago. They are not careless men. Unless they believed themselves untouchable. Eloise turned to face him directly. Julian, your uncle's will, why would he structure it to require your marriage? Why create conditions that would bring Carrington back into proximity with the estate? Julian went very still. I assumed he was attempting to force me into society. To end my isolation. Or, Eloise said slowly, he was creating an opportunity. A reason for the conspirators to reveal themselves. If they believed the estate might slip from their control, they would have to act. And in acting, they might expose themselves. Julian's eyes widened slightly. My uncle knew. He must have known what destroyed my father. He structured the will not to punish me, but to create conditions that would force them into the open. Which means we are not simply uncovering an old conspiracy. We are living inside a trap your uncle set for them. Eloise felt cold realization settle over her. And I am the bait. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. No, Julian said sharply. Absolutely not. If that was his intention, he underestimated the risk. Carrington has already demonstrated willingness to destroy anyone who threatens him. I will not allow you to. Allow. Eloise kept her voice level. Julian, I am already involved. From the moment I married you, I became part of this. Carrington's visit made that clear. Then we end it. Now. Tonight. Julian moved toward the desk, gathering documents with sharp, angry movements. I will tell Carrington the marriage was exactly what he suspected, a legal fiction. You will leave with the payment we agreed upon. More, if necessary. Enough to disappear completely. And the estate can go to hell, along with my uncle's schemes and Carrington's ambitions. He stopped, papers clutched in his hands. I will not risk you for property. Something in Eloise's chest tightened painfully. You would give up everything? Your inheritance, your father's legacy, the possibility of justice, all of it. For your safety? Julian met her eyes directly. Without hesitation. The admission stripped away every careful pretense between them. For weeks, they had been dancing around the truth that their arrangement had transformed into something neither had intended. Now it lay exposed, undeniable. Julian, Eloise said softly. Why? Because, he stopped. Started again. Because you defended me when no one has defended me in years. Because you tend me when I am ill without asking for gratitude. Because you look at my scars and see past them too. He struggled visibly. Because somewhere in this cold bargain, you became the first person in a decade to make me remember what it felt like to not be alone. Eloise could not breathe. Could not think beyond the sudden, overwhelming understanding that she felt precisely the same. That somewhere between survival and collaboration, necessity had transformed into something far more dangerous. I am not leaving, she said. Eloise. No. Listen to me. She moved closer, breaking the last barrier of careful distance. I have spent 6 months being erased. Watching myself disappear piece by piece until I was nothing but survival instinct and desperation. And then I came here, to this cold house with this scarred man, and I thought I was trading one form of erasure for another. Her voice shook slightly. But instead, I found someone who understands what it means to be deliberately destroyed. Someone who does not expect me to pretend the destruction did not happen. Someone who... She stopped, uncertain how to finish. Julian finished for her. Someone who sees you, he said quietly. As you are. Without pretense or pity. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. And I see you the same way. The space between them felt charged with everything they had been carefully not acknowledging. Julian's hand lifted, hovering near her face, before he caught himself and let it fall. This was not part of the bargain, he said. I know. I have nothing to offer you beyond danger and a name already destroyed. I did not ask for offers. Eloise. Her name sounded different in his voice now. Not the Duchess. Not the arrangement. Just her. If we continue this path, there is no easy ending. No clean dissolution at year's end. Everything becomes complicated. Dangerous. It is already complicated. Already dangerous. She reached up, her fingers barely brushing the scar along his jaw. He flinched but did not pull away. The question is whether we face it separately or together. For a long moment, Julian simply stared at her. Then, with infinite care, he closed the final distance between them. His hand cupped her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor of cursed cruelty. Together, he said, God help us both. The kiss was inevitable. Gentle at first, testing boundaries that had already dissolved. Then deeper, more urgent, carrying weeks of suppressed awareness and carefully maintained distance. Eloise's hands found his shoulders, steadying herself against the sudden intensity of feeling something beyond mere survival. Julian's arms circled her waist, drawing her closer, as though proximity alone could protect against everything threatening them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, reality reasserted itself with cold efficiency. This changes everything, Julian said, his forehead resting against hers. Yes. They will use it. Carrington and his associates. If they discover genuine feeling exists between us, they will use it as leverage. Let them try. Eloise pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I am tired of being afraid. Tired of being used. If they want to threaten me, they will discover I am not as easy to destroy as they believe. Julian's expression shifted from tenderness to concern. What are you planning? Nothing yet. But, she was interrupted by rapid footsteps in the corridor. Mrs. Hartwell burst through the library door without knocking, her face pale. Your Grace. Forgive the intrusion. But a messenger has arrived from London. He insists the matter is urgent. She held out a sealed letter. From Lord Carrington. Julian took the letter with visible reluctance, breaking the seal with sharp movements. As he read, his expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. What is it? Eloise asked. A summons. Carrington has convened a formal review of my uncle's will. He claims to have evidence that our marriage does not meet the will's requirements for legitimacy. Julian's jaw tightened. The hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now. If the executors rule against us, control of the estate transfers immediately. What evidence could he possibly have? None. But he does not need truth, only reasonable doubt. Julian set the letter down with controlled violence. He will argue that our marriage was contracted under false pretenses. That you were coerced. That we live separate lives and maintain no genuine marital relationship. He will call servants to testify about our separate quarters, our formal interactions, the lack of. He stopped. Affection, Eloise finished. He will argue we are strangers bound by legal fiction rather than genuine marriage. Yes. And until very recently, he would have been correct. Julian turned away, shoulders rigid. I have given him the ammunition he needs by insisting on emotional distance. By treating this as a business arrangement. Then we prove him wrong. How? By lying to executors? By fabricating affection we have only just begun to acknowledge. He shook his head. They will see through any pretense. We cannot suddenly claim feelings that developed over weeks when we have spent months demonstrating their absence. We do not claim anything, Eloise said, her mind racing. We prove it. Eloise. The documents. The evidence we have been gathering about the conspiracy. We bring it to the hearing. We demonstrate that our marriage was not merely legal necessity but recognition of shared history. Shared losses. Shared purpose. She moved to the desk, gathering papers. Carrington wants to prove we are strangers. We prove instead that we are allies with more reason to stand together than most couples who marry for love. Julian stared at her. That would require revealing everything we have uncovered. Making public accusations against powerful men based on evidence that might not hold in a proper court. Yes. It would make us targets. Not just for social censure, but potentially criminal retaliation. Yes. You understand what you are proposing? The risk involved. I understand that I am tired of watching powerful men destroy lives without consequence. Eloise's hands steadied as she organized documents into coherent order. My father died believing himself disgraced. Your father died isolated and broken. We have the opportunity to prove they were right. That the conspiracy they tried to expose was real. And we can do so while simultaneously proving our marriage is far more genuine than any merely sentimental union. Eloise, if we do this, there is no retreat. No safe dissolution at year's end. You will be bound to me and to this fight for however long it takes. I am already bound. She looked up from the documents to meet his eyes directly. Not by contract or convenience, but by choice. The question is whether you are willing to let me make that choice. Julian crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands framing her face with sudden urgency. I am willing. God help me, I want nothing more than to keep you beside me. But I need you to understand, truly understand, that I cannot promise safety. Cannot promise victory. Can promise only that I will fight beside you for however long you will have me. Then we fight together. Eloise covered his hands with her own. Starting with this hearing, we prove to Carrington and his associates that we are not the easy targets they believe us to be. They will retaliate. Undoubtedly. This could destroy whatever social standing either of us might hope to reclaim. I stopped caring about social standing the night I collapsed in your snow. Eloise allowed herself a slight smile. Besides, being married to a cursed duke has its advantages. Society already expects nothing from us. We might as well use that freedom. Something like admiration crossed Julian's expression. You are terrifying when determined. Good. So are you. Together, we might actually survive this. Julian kissed her again, briefer but no less intense. When he pulled back, his expression had shifted from concern to something harder. More resolved. Very well. We prepare for the hearing. We organize the evidence. We build a case that demonstrates not only legitimate marriage but justified cause for accusations against men who have operated without accountability for too long. He moved to the desk, already planning. Mrs. Hartwell can testify to our growing closeness. The servants can confirm. No servants, Eloise interrupted. They should not be forced to take sides in this battle. We testify. We present documents. We stand together and dare them to call us liars to our faces. Julian studied her for a long moment. You have changed since you arrived half dead at my gate. So have you. Eloise began organizing documents into folders. 3 months ago, you were prepared to live out a cold bargain and let me disappear at year's end. Now you are prepared to risk everything to keep me safe. Yes. No hesitation. No qualification. Then let us make certain we are both worth the risk. She handed him a folder of evidence. 3 days. We build an irrefutable case. And then we walk into that hearing and prove to Lord Carrington that destroying Wethertons and Elmsbury's is no longer quite so simple as it once was. Julian took the folder, his fingers brushing hers deliberately. Together. Together, Eloise agreed. The library that had been the scene of their careful distance became instead a war room. For 3 days, they barely slept, organizing evidence, constructing timelines, preparing testimony. Mrs. Hartwell brought meals that went largely untouched. The household felt the shift, the Duke and Duchess working side by side, speaking in low urgent tones, united in purpose that went far beyond convenient arrangement. On the morning of the hearing, as dawn broke cold and grey over Elmsbury House, Julian found Eloise already dressed and reviewing documents in the library. Ready? He asked. Eloise looked up. Saw not the cold, distant man who had saved her out of calculation but the partner who had, through proximity and shared pain, become something far more essential. The man she was choosing to stand beside not from necessity but from understanding that some battles could not be fought alone. Ready, she confirmed. They travelled to London together, documents secured, testimony prepared, and a marriage that had begun as survival transformed into something neither had dared hope for. Genuine alliance forged in the understanding that some things, truth, justice, and perhaps even love, were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. As their carriage rolled through London streets toward the hearing that would determine their future, Eloise felt neither fear nor doubt. Only clarity. She had collapsed at Julian's gate seeking nothing beyond survival. She was returning to London prepared to risk everything. The difference, she realized, was that she was no longer alone. And neither was he. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That, more than any legal contract or convenient bargain, was the marriage that would endure. Chapter 4, Claim and Reckoning. The hearing room was designed for intimidation. High ceilings. Dark paneling. A long table where the executors sat like judges presiding over a trial rather than a will review. Lord Carrington occupied the centre position, flanked by Lord Ashford and Sir Edmund Graves, all 3 men whose names appeared throughout the documents now secured in the leather case Julian carried. Gallery seating behind the executor's table held perhaps 20 observers. Solicitors. Distant relatives. Society figures who sensed scandal and had come to witness a duke's humiliation. Their whispers fell silent as Julian and Eloise entered. Eloise felt their stares. The scarred duke and his ruined bride. A marriage society had already judged impossible. Let them stare, she thought. Let them watch. Julian's hand found the small of her back, a brief, steadying touch that spoke volumes. Then they took their seats at the respondents' table, facing the executors with documents arranged before them like weapons. Lord Carrington called the proceedings to order with false solemnity. We are gathered to review the Duke of Elmsbury's compliance with the late Duke's testamentary requirements. Specifically, the condition requiring genuine marriage maintained for 1 year before estate control transfers fully. He adjusted his spectacles with practiced precision. Evidence has come to light suggesting the current Duke's marriage fails to meet these requirements. What evidence? Julian's voice cut through the formal rhetoric with surgical precision. Patience, Your Grace. We shall proceed methodically. Carrington gestured to his solicitor, who stood with a document folder. Mr. Pemberton will outline our concerns. Pemberton was younger, ambitious, the type who built careers on powerful men's patronage. He opened his folder with theatrical flourish. The marriage in question was contracted with unusual haste. No banns. Minimal witnesses. A bride with no family, no resources, no alternative prospects. He paused for effect. A bride, in short, with every reason to accept terms no woman of means would consider. Circumstances of necessity do not invalidate legal marriage, Julian said flatly. Perhaps not. But combined with evidence of continued separation, separate quarters, minimal interaction, no demonstration of genuine marital affection, they suggest an arrangement designed solely to satisfy legal requirements rather than representing authentic union. You have been investigating my household? Julian's voice dropped dangerously low. Conducting due diligence, Carrington interjected smoothly. The estate in question is substantial. The executors have obligation to ensure the will's terms are honored in spirit as well as letter. He leaned forward. Tell me, Your Grace, does your wife share your bed? The gallery erupted in scandalized whispers. Eloise felt heat rise in her face, not from shame, but from rage at the calculated intrusion. That, Julian said with lethal calm, is none of your concern. I'm afraid it is entirely our concern. A marriage in name only is still a marriage. Eloise spoke for the first time, her voice carrying clearly through the room. Legally binding. Properly witnessed. Satisfying every requirement specified in the late Duke's will. Carrington's smile sharpened. Ah, the bride speaks. Tell me, Mrs. Elmsbury, were you coerced into this arrangement? Offered payment for your participation in what amounts to contractual fraud? I was offered safety when I had none. Food when I was starving. Shelter when I was dying in the snow. Eloise held his gaze steadily. If accepting help when desperate constitutes fraud, Lord Carrington, then fraud is merely another word for survival. Quite eloquent. Did your husband prepare that speech? No one prepares me for anything. I speak for myself. She reached for the documents before her. As I am prepared to do now. Since you have raised questions about the legitimacy of our marriage, perhaps we should examine the legitimacy of this entire proceeding. Carrington's expression flickered. I'm not sure I follow. Then allow me to clarify. Eloise stood, documents in hand. Julian rose beside her, presenting a united front. You claim our marriage is fraudulent because it was contracted out of necessity rather than affection. I propose instead that our marriage is more legitimate than most, because it was founded on something far more substantial than sentimental attachment. And what might that be? Sir Edmund Graves asked, speaking for the first time. Shared history. Shared losses. Shared recognition of deliberate destruction. Eloise set the first document on the table, a letter in her father's hand. My father, Edward Wetherington, and the late Duke of Elmsbury were collaborating to expose financial fraud 20 years ago. Fraud involving a consortium of investors who stole from dozens of families while falsifying records to conceal their crimes. The whispers in the gallery intensified. Carrington's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Ancient history, he said dismissively. Both men were disgraced. Their accusations proven false. Were they? Julian set down a second document. This is a bank transfer record showing funds withdrawn from my father's estate accounts 3 weeks before his ruin. The exact amount that appeared in Lord Carrington's private holdings that same month. Circumstantial. Proves nothing. Perhaps not alone. Eloise added a third document. But combined with this, a similar transfer from my father's accounts to Lord Ashford's business ventures, dated 1 week before my father's scandal broke, it establishes pattern. Pattern is not proof of conspiracy, Ashford said, but his voice carried an edge now. Then let us discuss proof. Julian began laying out documents in methodical sequence. Falsified shipping manifests. Forged correspondence. Bank records showing systematic theft disguised as legitimate investment losses. My father and Mr. Wetherington discovered these irregularities. They began gathering evidence. And very suddenly, very conveniently, both men were destroyed by scandals that made their accusations appear to be desperate deflection. The gallery had gone silent. Even the executors seemed uncertain how to respond. This is outrageous, Carrington said, but his usual smooth confidence had fractured. You bring accusations based on 20-year-old documents. And current ones. Eloise set down a recent ledger. This is from your investment consortium's accounts from last month. The same patterns of false reporting continue. The same theft. You have been operating without consequence for 2 decades, Lord Carrington. Destroying anyone who threatened exposure. My father. The late Duke. And now, you intended to destroy us. Intended? Sir Edmund's eyes narrowed. That is quite an accusation. Is it? Julian's voice carried cold fury. You convened this hearing not from concern about the will's proper execution, but because our marriage threatened your control over the estate. If I satisfy the will's requirements, the executorship ends. You lose access to estate funds you have been quietly diverting for years. We have the records, gentlemen. Every fraudulent transaction. Every falsified report. Where did you? Ashford stopped himself, but the damage was done. The admission implicit in the question. My uncle, Julian said softly. The late Duke. He knew. He discovered what you had done to my father, and he spent his remaining years gathering proof. The will was never about forcing me to marry. It was about creating conditions that would expose you when you inevitably attempted to seize control. Carrington stood abruptly. This is absurd. Slanderous. We came here to review a questionable marriage, not to be accused of theft? Fraud? Conspiracy to destroy evidence. Eloise's voice rose. Of engineering the ruin and death of 2 good men whose only crime was integrity? Yes, Lord Carrington. Those are exactly the accusations we are making. Publicly. With documentation. No court would accept this evidence, Graves said desperately. It is circumstantial at best. Perhaps. Julian gathered the documents with deliberate care. But we are not in a court of law. We are in a public hearing that you convened. These observers, he gestured to the gallery, are witnesses to our accusations. The documents will be submitted to the appropriate authorities. If you believe our evidence is insufficient, you are welcome to defend yourselves in proper legal proceedings. The threat was unmistakable. Even circumstantial evidence, made public, would demand investigation. Their reputations would not survive scrutiny. Lord Carrington's face had gone from ruddy to pale. Your Grace, if you proceed with this reckless course. Reckless? Julian's control finally cracked into open anger. My father died believing himself disgraced. Eloise's father died the same. Both men were destroyed for attempting to expose your crimes. And you dare speak of recklessness? He stepped forward, forcing Carrington back. I am done with silence. Done with isolation. Done allowing fear of powerful men to prevent truth. Julian. Eloise's hand on his arm, steadying. Reminding. We agreed. Truth. Not vengeance. He stopped, took a breath, nodded. When he spoke again, his voice had regained control. The evidence will be submitted to the Lord Chancellor's office. To the banking authorities. To anyone with power to investigate properly. What you do with that knowledge is your concern. Our concern is simpler. And that is... Carrington's voice was hoarse. Our marriage. Julian turned to face Eloise fully, speaking to her though the words were meant for everyone present. You attempted to discredit our union by suggesting it was contracted without genuine feeling. Without legitimate foundation. You were correct that affection played no role in our initial arrangement. But you were profoundly wrong about everything else. Eloise felt her breath catch as Julian continued, his words precise but no longer cold. I married Eloise Wetherington because I needed to satisfy a legal requirement. That was true. But I chose to defend her, to stand with her, to trust her, because somewhere in the proximity we were forced to share, I discovered something I had believed impossible. Someone who saw past rumor to truth. Past scars to the person beneath. Someone who refused to fear me or pity me or demand more than I could give. He took her hand, the gesture deliberate and public. She is not my wife because a will required it. She is my wife because I choose her. Today. Tomorrow. For however long she will have me. The one-year condition is meaningless. This marriage endures not from obligation but from recognition that some partnerships are forged in fire and emerge stronger for it. The gallery erupted. Shocked whispers. Furious denials from the executors. But Eloise heard none of it. Only Julian's voice, quiet now, meant only for her. If you still want freedom, I will not stop you. But if you choose to stay. I choose to stay, Eloise interrupted. Not because I need protection. Not because I lack alternatives. But because fighting beside you has reminded me who I was before they tried to erase me. And because... She took a breath. Because I love you. Not the title. Not the estate. You. The man who saved a dying woman and offered cold bargains because he had forgotten what warmth felt like. The man who learned to trust again because someone finally refused to turn away. Julian's hand tightened on hers. For a moment, the entire room vanished. Just the two of them. A marriage that had begun in snow and desperation, now claimed openly in front of everyone who had assumed it impossible. Lord Carrington's voice shattered the moment. This changes nothing. The evidence is circumstantial. The accusations are slander. And your marriage, genuine or not, does not protect you from legal consequences. Perhaps not, Julian agreed, turning back to face the executors. But we are not seeking protection. We are seeking truth. And we will pursue it with or without your cooperation. He gathered the remaining documents. This hearing is concluded. We have satisfied the will's requirements. The executorship ends today. If you wish to contest this, you know where to find us. We will not be hiding. They walked out together, ignoring the chaos erupting behind them. Solicitors shouting questions. Executors demanding order. Observers rushing to spread word of the scandal that would dominate London society for months. None of it mattered. They had spoken truth. Made their choice. Claimed each other openly despite every reason to remain silent. The carriage ride back to Elmsbury House passed in silence, not the careful distance of strangers, but the comfortable quiet of people who had said everything necessary and now simply existed together. Mrs. Hartwell met them at the door, her expression carefully neutral. Your Grace. Your Grace. How did? We survived, Eloise said simply. And we told the truth. The rest will unfold as it will. Then I shall prepare tea, Mrs. Hartwell said with the faintest smile. In the library, I think. Where you both seem most comfortable. The library. Where they had spent weeks building a case. Learning to trust. Discovering that proximity could become partnership and partnership could become something neither had believed possible. Julian closed the door behind them, leaning against it for a moment. The tension of the hearing finally releasing. We have made powerful enemies, he said. We had them already. Eloise moved to the window, looking out over grounds that felt, for the first time, like home rather than refuge. At least now they know we will not go quietly. The investigations will take months. Perhaps years. There will be social consequences. Scandal. Julian. She turned to face him. I have been ruined, destitute, dying in the snow, and married to a cursed duke. Social scandal holds remarkably little terror for me now. He crossed the room, gathering her into his arms with none of the careful restraint that had defined their early interactions. I love you. I should have said it in that room. Should have claimed you more clearly. You claimed me perfectly. Eloise rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. And I claimed you back. That is all that matters. The estate will survive or not based on evidence and law. Not on our fear. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. We did what we came to do. Expose truth. Defended each other. Everything else is simply aftermath. Aftermath proved complicated, as they had known it would. The Lord Chancellor's office opened investigations. Banking authorities examined records. Society divided sharply, some viewing them as brave truth-tellers, others as reckless scandalmongers. Lord Carrington and his associates hired expensive solicitors and prepared elaborate defenses. But Elmsbury House, once a tomb of isolation, became something different. A home built not on romance or fantasy, but on harder foundations. Trust earned through crisis. Respect forged through collaboration. Love discovered not despite difficulty but because of it. Eloise slowly reclaimed her identity, not as Miss Wetherington of Hartfield Manor, but as someone new. The Duchess of Elmsbury who corresponded with banking authorities. Who organized documents. Who testified when required with clear-eyed precision. Who proved that surviving devastation could mean emerging stronger rather than simply broken. Julian's reputation shifted gradually from feared recluse to principled reformer. His scars remained, but society's interpretation changed. Not a curse, but simply a man who had endured loss and emerged willing to fight for truth regardless of cost. Their marriage became, paradoxically, exactly what Lord Carrington had accused it of being, and nothing like it at all. A partnership built on necessity that had transformed into choice. An arrangement that had dissolved into genuine union. A bargain that had evolved into love. 6 months after the hearing, as spring broke over Elmsbury Estate with a warmth that felt like benediction, Eloise found Julian in the library, their library, reviewing correspondence from solicitors. "The case moves forward," he said without looking up. "Slowly, but forward." "Good." She settled into the chair beside him, no longer his across the desk but next to him. Always next to him now. "Mrs. Hartwell tells me we have been invited to the Havisham Ball next month. Society event. We could decline. Or we could attend. Together. Daring anyone to comment on the cursed Duke and his ruined bride." Eloise smiled. "I find I quite enjoy making society uncomfortable now." Julian looked up, his expression softening in the way it only did for her. "You have changed since collapsing at my gate." "So have you." "We changed each other. For the better, I think." "Undeniably." He set down the correspondence, taking her hand. The ring she still wore, that simple band from their cold wedding, caught the light. "Do you ever regret accepting my bargain?" "Every bargain has costs," Eloise said thoughtfully. "But no. I do not regret choosing survival. Choosing partnership. Choosing you." She leaned closer. "Do you regret offering it?" "I regret every moment I wasted maintaining distance when I could have been knowing you instead." Julian kissed her gently. "But the outcome? No. Never." Outside, spring continued its work. Gardens that had been frozen during their first meeting now bloomed with possibility. The estate that had been refuge became foundation for something neither had dared imagine when they were separately drowning in their own devastation. They had been two people erased by forces beyond their control. They had become two people who refused erasure. Who chose each other. Who proved that some marriages endured not because they were easy or romantic or begun in ideal circumstances, but because they were built on truth, claimed in defiance of those who wished them silent, and maintained through the simple, revolutionary act of choosing partnership over isolation. The story that had begun with collapse in the snow ended not with fantasy, but with something better. Reality. Hard won. Deliberately chosen. Earned through crisis and claimed without apology. Eloise Wetherington, who had once had nothing, now had everything that mattered. Not wealth or title or social standing, though those had been restored through effort and truth. She had choice. She had voice. She had a partner who saw her clearly and stood beside her without requiring her to be anything other than exactly who she was. And Julian Elmsbury, who had believed himself cursed to isolation, discovered instead that some curses were merely lies waiting to be disproven by someone brave enough to look past rumor to truth. Their marriage endured. Not because it had to, but because they wanted it to. And that, in the end, was the only bargain worth making.